Put your phone down for a second. Not because I want you to be present, because I want you to feel the thing you keep avoiding, the part of you that would trade dignity for relief if the pressure got heavy enough. And before you think, that's dramatic, I'm not like that, answer honestly. When you are hungry in the practical sense or hungry in the emotional sense, what do you become? Polite, patient, principled? Or do you become strategic, desperate, and small? The hidden self always shows up when the body panics and the mind bargains. This video is about a simple, brutal idea. When survival gets activated, your values don't disappear. They get hijacked. And the cost of that hijacking can be your life, your future, your identity, and the self-respect you swore you would never sell. We're going to use one story as a scalpel, not a motivational fable, not a be grateful parable. A tragedy that shows how hunger can turn a person into an animal, and how a certain kind of power can turn charity into cruelty. And then I'm going to pull that mechanism out of the past and put it on your timeline in 2026, where people are still eating, just with different food. When the stomach rules, everything else becomes negotiable. That's the hook. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. Let's start with the most uncomfortable definition of hunger. Not metaphorical. Not, I'm hungry for success. Real hunger is a system state. It's not just a sensation. It rewires your time perception, your attention, your moral compass, your social behavior, your willingness to endure humiliation. Imagine the body as a court. If the jury is starved long enough, it convicts you of patience. You stop deliberating. You start consuming. Your brain begins to treat the world like a pantry. Every pause becomes a threat. Every delay becomes danger. Even your memories of dignity become background noise, like an ad you used to ignore. In the story we're using, there's an old woman who walks into a rich household under a lie. She tells herself she is visiting a grandchild. Everyone else calls it a visit. But her eyes don't match the story. Her eyes are hunting eyes. Not romantic, not tender. Hunting. The kind of gaze that belongs to someone who already made peace with humiliation because the alternative is worse, the certainty of not eating. People always ask, why didn't she just leave? Why didn't she set boundaries? Why didn't she walk away with pride? The answer is ugly. She tried to imagine walking away, but her body didn't allow it. Her stomach held the steering wheel. She had lived long enough in scarcity that pride became a luxury item. Her self-respect wasn't gone because she suddenly became immoral. It was gone because her nervous system treated dignity as unnecessary risk. This is what society conveniently refuses to teach. Dignity isn't only a mindset, it's also a physiological state. When your body is in emergency, your moral reasoning is the first thing to be overruled. Now contrast her with the woman in power, the rich host. Here is where the story becomes even more psychologically sharp, because it doesn't just show one cruel person. It shows a specific cruelty pattern that looks polite on the outside. The rich woman isn't portrayed as someone who swings a stick. She doesn't need to. She commits a subtler violence, the violence of control through delay, through teasing, through moral lectures, through deciding when the needy person is allowed to be fed. This kind of person doesn't just withhold food, she withholds status. She forces the old woman to wait, to listen, to endure being talked down to. She performs superiority like a ritual, and it's not accidental. In behavioral psychology, power often asserts itself by changing the rules of time and attention. The powerful person decides. The powerless person waits. Waiting becomes a form of punishment. The delay is the leash. That's why this charity is not mercy. It's theater. The rich woman knows exactly what hunger does to a human. She knows hunger shrinks options. She knows it turns people into negotiators of their own dignity. So she doesn't give the gift gently. She drags the person through discomfort so the giver can feel morally elevated. You can smell this type of cruelty in modern life too. It shows up everywhere someone offers help but also requires you to kneel, smile, perform gratitude on command, and tolerate the humiliation like it's part of the package. In 2026, you can even film it. You can throw money at a stranger and call it kindness, while the stranger stands in line like a penitent. You can caption it like a story of generosity, but the real content is domination. So the old woman arrives, waiting for permission to eat. She sits in a room that feels colder than weather. She swallows not only words, but her own anger, her own shame, her own fear of being sent away with empty hands. Here's the micro story that matters. Watch what happens in her body before the meal even starts. There's pain. There's dizziness, not just sadness. Physiology. When blood sugar crashes, stress hormones rise. Your brain gets foggy. Your stomach becomes a living animal that tries to eat itself. Your mind gets narrower. You can't think in broad lessons. You can only think in immediate relief. This is the trap. People watching from comfort imagine morality as a switch. They think she has dignity. She should choose it. But hunger is not a debate club. Hunger is a siege. Then the meal comes. It's simple: boiled vegetables, fish sauce. But to her, it is not food. It is a rescue operation. It is the doorway out of collapse. So she doesn't eat like a person savoring flavor. She eats like a person fighting for survival. There's no elegant chewing, there's urgency. There's the kind of eating where you don't taste, because tasting would require slowing down. And slowing down would require trusting the future. She can't trust the future. When you've lived with uncertainty, you stop believing and just eat normally. You eat now because now might be the last time, so she stuffs her mouth and doesn't have time to swallow. She sweats. Her body can't process the sudden overload. Her stomach rebels. She loosens her belt because the body is panicking about pressure, about expansion, about injury. And here comes the darkest truth of the whole story. The meal that should have been relief becomes an ending. Because the body doesn't just suffer from hunger, it suffers from rebound. Long-term scarcity changes the digestive system. The gut shrinks. The metabolic controls adapt. Then, suddenly, a flood arrives. Blood sugar spikes. Dopamine spikes. Relief turns into a distorted euphoria. And because the nervous system is already exhausted, the body can't handle the shock. This is called refeeding injury. In ordinary life, it can cause severe problems. In this story, it becomes a tragedy. The body collapses from the very thing that saved it. And still, we're not done. Because the story doesn't only blame physiology. It reveals something psychological even darker. She eats partly to survive, yes, but also to retaliate. Retaliation against humiliation. When a person has no power to punish a humiliator, they punish themselves with their own body. They turn their body into a weapon. Think about the logic. The rich woman wants her to be small, wants her to be obedient, quiet, graceful. The rich woman wants her to accept a performance of gratitude. But the old woman knows the rich woman is angry she had to offer food. The old woman knows she is being judged while she eats. She knows the host enjoys the position of being the gatekeeper. So the old woman tries to steal control back using the only tool she has left: her mouth, her hunger, her ability to consume. She eats beyond enough. She eats past comfort. She eats like she can reverse the earlier humiliation by creating a new discomfort for the one who holds power. This is what people don't admit about their hidden self. Sometimes you're not just chasing what you need, you're chasing the fantasy of power. And when you don't have real power, you use self-destruction as an imitation of power. You might recognize this in yourself without wanting to. Maybe you've stayed in a relationship that is clearly disrespectful, because leaving would feel like surrender. Maybe you keep showing up to a job that drains you, because quitting would mean admitting you were fooled. So you keep going until you burn out. Not because it's rational, but because you're trying to win in a psychological war you can't name. This is the hidden mechanism. The body pays for emotional conflicts because the mind can't win anywhere else. Now, the rich host expected the meal to conclude the matter. Feed the poor woman, watch her leave, feel superior again. But the meal becomes a massacre of time and control. The old woman is consumed by the food. She sweats, she trembles, she tries to breathe as her abdomen expands. She can palate and joy she endures. And after she's stuffed, she doesn't feel clean relief. She feels regret mixed with rage, mixed with physical terror. Because in starvation, you learn an impossible lesson. If you stop eating, you might lose everything again. So even after enough, your mind keeps asking, what if this is it? That's why she continues. She doesn't know how to stop, because stopping feels like dying. Then, as night arrives, the horror shifts. She goes home late, but not to protect dignity. She goes home because staying would require more humiliation. She drinks water to try to soothe the discomfort, but the discomfort doesn't soothe, it multiplies. The body is inflamed, the stomach is enraged, the gut is in chaos. She lies down and can't sleep. She turns and turns. Her belly makes sounds. It feels tight and alive like a trapped animal. At around midnight, pain becomes undeniable. She vomits. Her body convulses. It's not poetic, it's ugly. It's diarrhea and suffering and weakness. And then she dies. There is no dramatic farewell, no long speech about lessons, no noble tears from a loving family. She dies in a way that doesn't even grant her the dignity of tragedy. And the rich host follows the death with mockery. Listen to what that means. The humiliator doesn't mourn. She punishes after death. She uses the corpse as proof of her theory. She says something like, look, even if she came here late, she still died. Because no amount of permission mattered. She ate too much, a joke at the edge of cruelty. She even teaches the servants as if death is a moral lesson for others. This is the real rot. In this world, suffering doesn't earn compassion. It earns contempt. So the story is not only about hunger, it's about the culture of contempt that feeds off hunger. Now here's where we bring the past into 2026, because the mechanism didn't vanish. It evolved. People still suffer hunger. Not necessarily hunger for rice, hunger for something else. Hunger for belonging, hunger for approval, hunger for recognition, hunger for escape. And once you understand the old woman's psychology, you can see modern versions everywhere. First, modern hunger, hunger for being seen. On social media, people do strange things. They degrade themselves for likes. They chase numbers the way the old woman chased food. They post humiliation in public because privacy is too painful. They perform to secure a temporary chemical hit, dopamine from engagement. It's refeeding in a modern costume. It's the same pattern. A long period of emotional scarcity followed by an instant flood of validation. And like the body after starvation, the mind can't handle sudden spikes without consequences. What are the consequences? Anxiety, depression, the collapse when the likes disappear, the emptiness that follows, the inability to feel real value without performance, and then society throws stones, just like the rich host throws words. People call them pathetic, attention-seeking, weak. But here's the truth nobody admits. They weren't weak. They were starving. They were hungry for recognition, hungry for belonging, hungry for a signal that says, I exist. When someone is starving psychologically, you can't judge them with good taste. You're judging a nervous system in crisis. Second, modern hunger trap. Hunger disguised as freedom through debt. Look at the people who rush into fast money, credit, loans, and reckless spending. They use borrowed income to purchase relief. They buy clothes, gadgets, status objects that promise to cover internal poverty. That borrowed money is not just money, it's a temporary meal. It satisfies the immediate craving, the craving to stop feeling less than. For a moment, the system works, the hunger pauses, the shame calms, but the bill arrives like illness. Debt turns into pain. The body and mind start paying the price with stress, fear, and collapse. The binge creates a rebound injury, except in this case it's financial and psychological. This is why so many people look happy while buying but miserable afterward. It's not because they're lying, it's because the relief is chemical, not structural. They solve the hunger for recognition with an expensive distraction. The distraction doesn't heal the wound, it postpones the crash. Third, modern hunger. Hunger that destroys self-respect at work. You've seen this too. In offices, people perform obsequiousness. They become small. They kiss up. They accept disrespect because they want influence, promotions, deals, survival. They trade dignity for a seat at the table. But the table isn't a home, it's a trap. Because dignity is not just a moral virtue. Dignity is a form of internal safety. When you sacrifice it repeatedly, you stop believing in yourself. You start adapting to humiliation. You become accustomed to bending. And over time, you don't even notice when you're being domesticated by status. The old woman's choice was between her stomach and her self-respect. She tried to protect self-respect by hiding the truth of why she was there, but her stomach overpowered her. Her body made decisions her mind couldn't overrule. In a workplace, the stomach of survival looks like bills, rent, family pressure, the fear of being discarded. The self-respect becomes negotiable. And once it's negotiable, it gets bought and sold daily. That's why people tolerate toxic managers. That's why people laugh at cruelty. That's why they pretend to agree with nonsense. Not because they are incapable of integrity, because they are hungry. Hungry enough to rationalize. Hungry enough to call surrender strategy. Hungry enough to tell themselves, it's only temporary. I'll restore myself later. But later becomes a graveyard of delayed dignity. Now let's sharpen one more knife. The story is also about the difference between hunger and greed. People watching the old woman might think she ate too much because she was greedy. They might accuse her of being incapable of restraint. But greed is not the first cause here. Hunger is the first cause. The body is hijacked. The psychology is distorted. The mind is trying to secure safety through consumption. Her eating is partly survival, partly rebound, partly retaliation, partly a desperate attempt to reclaim agency. Greed would imply pleasure as the main driver. She doesn't eat with pleasure. She eats with urgency and pain. There's a difference between someone who enjoys excess and someone whose system is collapsing. So when you look at someone who makes self-destructive choices, stop using moral labels. Stop saying they should have known better. Sometimes they did know. But knowing doesn't help when your nervous system is in emergency.
This is your permission slip to be honest about yourself too. Because you may have done something similar in your own life, just with different props. You might have stayed in an abusive dynamic because leaving would have felt like death. You might have chased approval so intensely you compromised your values.
You might have spent money you didn't have to buy belonging. You might have made content that embarrassed you because silence felt worse. If you did, it doesn't mean you're doomed. It means you were hungry for something, and you found a way to feed the hunger that cost you something important. Now I want to push further, because the hidden self doesn't only hide actions, it hides the truth behind them. The hidden truth might be this: you don't only want food, you want safety without humiliation. You want to stop feeling at the mercy of other people's moods. You want to stop feeling like your needs are a burden. You want to stop begging internally for permission to exist. So you choose strategies that promise relief: pleasing, performing, spending, chasing, staying. But strategies don't heal the root hunger. Strategies only manage symptoms until the rebound injury hits. You might feel that right now. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're numb. Maybe you keep repeating a pattern you hate. You're not stuck because you're not disciplined enough. You're stuck because your system learned a coping mechanism under pressure. And now that coping mechanism fires automatically, even when the danger is no longer the same. That's how trauma works, not as a single event, as a pattern of automatic responses. The old woman didn't choose to die. Her body responded to scarcity with emergency physiology. Her mind responded with a desperate control attempt. Her environment responded with cruelty disguised as conditional charity. All three layers interacted until the outcome was fatal. Your life isn't scripted like a classic tragedy, but the architecture exists. Layer 1, your internal alarm system. Layer 2, your coping fantasy. Layer 3, the external environment that either amplifies or soothes the alarm. If you want to rise, you don't only need motivation, you need to interrupt at least one layer. So what does rising actually look like without fake positivity? It looks like refusing the bargain. Refusing the bargain that says, my dignity is optional if I'm desperate enough. Refusing the bargain that says, I will humiliate myself to avoid discomfort. Refusing the bargain that says, if I just chase the right number, the right person, the right purchase, I'll finally feel whole. Because that bargain will always create a rebound. It will take your time, then your money, then your mind, then your identity. And when it finishes, you will not feel satisfied. You will feel ashamed that you ever believed the hunger would stop. Now listen carefully, because the darkest honest takeaway is not hunger is bad. Hunger is natural. The question is what you do when it becomes a tyrant. In the story, the old woman and the rich host represent two extremes of the same mechanism. The old woman shows what happens when survival strips away self-respect. The rich host shows what happens when power turns charity into humiliation. Both are tragedies of imbalance. One eats to silence fear. One starves dignity to confirm power. Both systems destroy the person in the middle. So here is the question you need to answer tonight, privately, without editing the truth. In your life, what have you eaten? Have you eaten approval by performing for people who never intended to love you? Have you eaten money by borrowing yourself into a corner just to cover shame? Have you eaten your own voice by staying silent in rooms where you were disrespected because the alternative felt like poverty? Have you eaten intimacy in a way that turned you into a customer of affection? Have you sold your smile to buy temporary calm? And if you've done it, don't just feel guilty. Understand the mechanism. You weren't born broken, you were activated. Your hidden self found a way to survive, even if survival required sacrifice. Now the hard part, do you keep paying the same price? Or do you change the terms? Because there is a moment in every pattern where you can either continue eating, or you can tolerate the hunger without letting it make your decisions for you. That tolerance is the beginning of strength. It doesn't feel good, it feels